Welcome into the Illini Inquirer Podcast. We got three of us on here today. It's Jeremy Werner, Joey Wagner, and Ryan Easterling. And we're going to step away from the basketball content. We've been basketball heavy on this podcast here recently and kind of recap a big month of recruiting for Illinois football. They've added 7 commitments, including Jershaun Newton, the latest, the younger brother of Johnny Newton, of course, the two-time All-American. And Jershaun, an athlete, could play on either side of the ball. But let's break down what Illinois has accomplished over the last month, what they've missed out on over the last month, and how we feel about this class of 2025. Joey Wagner, how are you, buddy?
I'm good, Jeremy. Got a little 4th of July celebrating in yesterday. Shout out to Jershaun Newton for announcing early in the day, and we didn't have to be on standby all day. That was good.
That's right. Ryan Easterling, how are you, man? How was the 4th?
I'm good. I'm down south, so it was nice and toasty down here. I think we hit triple digits yesterday down in Arkansas, so got a good sweat in.
That's good. That's good. I'm just coming from Florida last week, and yes, nice and warm and toasty. I don't know how people do it down there, Ryan. I don't know, especially like inland Florida, anywhere inland in the South. I don't get how people survive.
It's a sauna, man. I don't know. I mean, I guess you maybe build up a tolerance or you just get used to it, but it's a way of life, I guess. I don't really know.
Yeah, Joe, just sweating by stepping outside for a minute. It doesn't sound
thanks. I do that now. I'm good. I'm good.
All right, let's break down 7 commitments for Illinois during the last month. They filled a lot of needs here, boys. And my question was, who intrigues you most? But I don't think that's without a doubt. It's Jershaun Newton. Intrigues me the most, Joey, of what he could be, where he will play, how he fits into all of this. Obviously, the legacy angle with Johnny Newton. So I'm just going to let you start off. What do you think of Jershaun Newton joining Illinois?
I think he's a good athlete, and you get a top 700 kid. I believe he's 6. I meant to look this up before. Definitely a top 1,000 kid who had some offers, right? But he preferred to play quarterback. He's sitting ranked 669 in the class. He wanted to play quarterback, and I don't know that there were a lot of suitors lined up to give him that opportunity. I think he's got really intriguing film defensively, but Illinois said, all right, come in and give it a whirl. See if you can cut it here. See if this is going to be a fit for you. At least that's our understanding of how things went. He told me he wanted the opportunity to play quarterback. Illinois, on his official visit, put him in the quarterback room. They had him break down film with Barry Lunny. I mean, that's recruiting someone as a quarterback, but it does feel like there's the underlying, hey, man, this kid would be a good linebacker or a good, safety if things ended up teetering that way, probably closer to linebacker. But he's a kid you want to get in there and see how the chips fall. And I understand they have a quarterback in the class already in Carson Boyd. And, if you're looking at that from the outside, you think, like what's the dynamic here? And I think it's a fair question to wonder how Bret Bielema and his coaching staff will thread that needle and kind of make that work for all parties. But you just look at the kid and real quick, like talking around over the course of the last week, someone said, we made a good point. I don't know if you two will agree, so I'll turn the floor to you after this. They said in every recruiting class, say you have 20 commits, right, or 20 signees, 4 or 5 of those guys are going to just not pan out. That's just a fact of recruiting. If Jershaun Newton doesn't pan out at quarterback, they said, well, now you've got a second chance at him at linebacker or at safety. And I thought that was a kind of a really good point for someone to have made. And there seems to be confidence that he would be good on that side of the ball.
Yeah, he's a good football player, Ryan. And whether it's offense, I mean, he's a heck of a high school quarterback. I think he'd be a group of 5 guy that the group of 5 schools would love him at quarterback. And I think he'd have a real chance to make a big impact there. Now, whether you can be a Big Ten quarterback, let's get into that. But Illinois has shown a willingness, and Bret Bielema has shown a willingness. Like, let's get good football players in the door. Let's give them a chance to play the position they prefer. And if it doesn't work out, we can change the position. So Isaiah Williams, let's give him in his first spring a chance to compete at quarterback with Brandon Peters. Didn't work out for him, didn't win the job. All right, let's move to wide receiver, Isaiah. I think it's the best thing for your future. That worked out. Caden Fagan, most are recruiting him as an edge or a linebacker. Illinois is like, no, come play running back. Now he looks like he's going to be a bell cow running back. Eddie Turk wants to start off on defensive line while a lot of schools are playing him in the offensive line. Illinois had conversations about the offensive line, but he's starting out at defensive line where he prefers to play. And now Jershaun Newton, get him in the program, let him try and compete. At best, he's good, and he's a good quarterback. At worst, in 3 or 4 semesters, you can move him to linebacker or defensive back or wherever you want to. So, Ryan, I'll turn the floor to you. What do you think of Jershaun Newton as a quarterback compared to a Carson Boyd, And what do you make him as a potential defensive prospect down the line?
Well, as you mentioned with a few of the guys you named, it's a little bit different than guys who come in and don't pan out at their position, and then it's like, well, where do we put them? There's actually a plan where, hey, if it doesn't work out here, we think you'll still be great here. And so, the plan B isn't a fallback. The plan B isn't really a, hey, this is just where we need to kind of sequester you until you potentially move on. It's, hey, if this doesn't work, we know you're passionate about playing quarterback. We know you want to play quarterback. We'll give you a shot at it, a true, honest shot. But if it doesn't work out, we still think you're going to be a hell of a linebacker. And that's just the case with a lot of these special athletes. You mentioned an Isaiah Williams. You mentioned a Caden Fagan. They have the talent to play multiple positions. Give them a shot. I don't see any issue with not doing it. The only thing I guess I would caution is just if it doesn't look like it's going to work out at quarterback after maybe a semester or two, get him into that second position, whether it's linebacker or safety, so he can really start working on his craft. Looking at his tape as a linebacker, he plays a lot of like an edge rush linebacker, like a Will. He's pretty good there too already. And that's where you can see that the defensive staff is probably like, all right, Barry, take your crack at it. But once he's ready, he's ours. I think he's just an all around good athlete. I mean, to be frank, he's a Newton. Like they are so good at college. You see what Jershaun does at Toledo. You could see what Johnny obviously did at Illinois as a 2-time All-American. And now you bring in another guy, it's just that family legacy. There's just something in the water there at the Newton house that just makes them all great players.
Yeah, and they're really, really competitive. My hold up with Jershaun, I mean, he's an accurate passer. He's got good touch on his deep ball. I wouldn't say he's a blazing fast guy. He ran an 11.7 100-meter dash, which probably over a 4.7 40. But he's a physical runner, and he's got a good feel for running and can run through people. And I think he can add 20 pounds pretty easily to his frame, which makes him so interesting as a defensive prospect. But he's got kind of this shot put throw that I think limits his velocity. Ryan, I think that is going to matter at the next level. Like you got to zip it in there at the next level, unless you just have unbelievable feel and touch and accuracy. So that's my holdup. I think Carson Boyd is a cleaner prospect as a passer. I think Trey Petty is a cleaner prospect as a passer. What Jershaun reminds me of is maybe a little bit Karan Taylor. I don't want to go quite AJ Bush because AJ Bush was way taller, bigger than him, but like just that physical kind of runner that needs to hone in a few things. Not that he's a raw passer, because he's getting obviously a lot of good coaching. It's just that delivery is a hang up for me. So I think he's going to have to overcome that maybe.
Yeah, it's a little bit unconventional. That's the word I use, because it does have that kind of short shot put style where he's pulling it kind of inside over his shoulder. And I think that does limit his velocity in some of his longer throws. His receivers on a lot of his long balls are pretty open. And, I think mentally he knows right where he needs to go with the ball, where he tries to put it. But at the college level, you're going to need a lot more velocity to hit tighter windows against more elite defensive backs. And so that, I think, is the one concern and the one thing that I think he'll have to overcome if he is going to play quarterback long-term. But to your point about him and his physicality, I watched his tape and I'm like, dang, man, this guy could be a running back too. It's, if Illinois wasn't so loaded now in the running back room, I think he could easily slot in as a running back, because you see him bounce off of like the first couple of would-be tacklers. And there's not a whole lot of quarterbacks that do that. And so, he's just an all-around great athlete. He's a playmaker. He's a gamer. He's competitive. I think he's going to bring his A game as a quarterback. I just think that some of those mechanical things as a quarterback might be a challenge and might be what end up ultimately ushering over to linebacker. But I mean, I never would count him out. I don't want to count out a Newton at all. They're gamers, and Johnny was a high school running back for a bit, and then he eventually bulked up and played defensive tackle. So I don't want to rule anything out. I'll put it that way. But looking long term and what his best future might be, it just seems like more natural fit would be kind of the quarterback of the defense.
And watching that defensive film, I'll throw it to you, Joey. But watching the defensive film, Ryan, I just see some natural instincts. Like he started as a freshman on varsity at Clearwater Central Catholic, which is a really good program. And his pass rush abilities is natural. It's like he's been working on that. Like he's learned things from his older brother who's a lot bigger than him. But it feels like he's learned some things. And obviously, Johnny's, his experience here, Joey, at Illinois, certainly played a comfort level. I'm a younger brother. listen, we kind of want to forge our own path at times, but there's a comfort in knowing exactly what you're going to get at Illinois out of, the coaching staff. And that seemed to play a big role here with Jershaun, Joey.
Yeah, it did. I also want to add before I get into that, can we just zoom out and talk about Illinois quarterback recruiting? Because there have been cycles in the last 8 years where you're like, oh man, no doubt, like Isaiah Williams, right? Like no doubt, put him at quarterback because you're not recruiting that position at a level that's good enough in the Big Ten. And now, obviously, we like Carson Boyd as a prospect. I think he's a good quarterback. Then you still have Trey Petty, right? Like you can just kind of, if you zoom out a little bit, there's a big picture of, hey, this room, as we've noticed for a while, like they're upgrading talent here. And the fact that this isn't a no doubt, like, of course he's a quarterback. Of course, like put him there. Why wouldn't you? Like that says a lot. And I think we have to acknowledge that.
To your point, 6 years ago, like I mentioned, like for a group of 5 school, this would be like a big quarterback, I think, win. Because I really think he could be a clear path to a starting job in a couple of years at a school like that. But Illinois would have been there like 5-6 years ago. But what Barry Lunny has done with that room with Altmaier, he inherited Leary, obviously, but then you had Petty and Carson Boyd, who I love, is just a little undersized. Like that tells you how far they've come, Joe. It's a good point.
That's right. And to your point about Jershaun, I said, hey, what kind of comfort level does it play with you that you don't have to wonder if you're going to go up there and it's all going to be smoke and mirrors and you're just going to be trotted out to, linebacker. Just you've known this staff for 3 years, right? Or 4 years now. And when they got in and convinced Johnny to stay, I would imagine several times, given the overtures that he probably had from other programs in the SEC, he said, yeah, I know those guys. And I'm paraphrasing a little bit the stories on the Illini Inquirer, but that mattered. And you already had those relationships. And Bret and the coaching staff and Tank Wright did such a good job with Johnny that you built trust, not just in Jershaun, but in his family. And I think that really matters. And maybe in his heart, Jershaun wanted to push this into the fall. He told me that numerous times over the course of the summer. It kind of strikes me as maybe hoping Florida State would jump in there and give him a chance at quarterback. But he just realized, like, hey, this is it. Like, this is right for me. I want to get on with my senior year. They're giving me the chance. And I'm with Ryan. Like, I'm not going to count out on Newton until you see a portion of Indies and he's sailing, if he's sailing the ball or whatever. Like, give him a shot. And like you said, best case scenario, you got a good quarterback on your hands. Worst case scenario, you might have a good linebacker on your hands. Like you take a Newton kid and watch it work itself out because it will more times than not.
And I really appreciate the Newton's commitment to the Jer blank. The Jer legacy quote that he gave you was great. And Ryan Easterling, applause for the 4th of July. That was really well done. I love the bit. Joey, it is fantastic. This bit to the Jer whatever. Johnny's been running it up there.
Yeah, it's very Johnny Newton, right? I wasn't surprised to see Johnny. You probably had that one saved in the drafts for a little bit before he tweeted it out there, but it's fun, man. And the Newtons are a fun family to get to know and to get to cover. And Johnny's obviously the most, to our experience, the most vocal one, and that has played out. But Jershaun seemed really excited last night when we caught up on the phone. And I told you, like, he actually had a good amount to say. And sometimes you're, as a recruit, and we're calling these kids, and there's still cards to play close to the vest, right? And, man, he seemed really, really excited about this opportunity, and now we'll see how it plays out for him.
As we said, Ryan, 7 commitments since the beginning of June, Illinois up to 13 commitments in this class. So I want to throw it to you, out of the 6 other guys, who intrigues you the most as a prospect, as we kind of open this up to kind of recapping and reviewing the rest of the month?
In terms of in terms of a long-term prospect, I think there are a few guys that still are developing, still could turn into something. But the guy who I'm interested to see this fall as a high school senior really the most is Cameron Brooks. He's a guy that was recruited originally as an edge, but has added a significant amount of weight. His tape is awesome. And I'm curious to see what he does at his new playing weight. Now he's up to, I think, like 285, something in that range. I mean, he could very well bulk into a defensive tackle or an inside defensive lineman, similar to that Newton role. He's got the explosiveness and the quickness. I think that's something that really sets him apart. And if he can continue to play with that quickness and that agility at his new weight, I think he could be a guy that makes an impact early. Because when you look at that room, there's pieces, but there's not a lot of depth. And so he has a chance, if he can continue to develop, to make an early impact potentially. I mean, level of competition is completely different. But I'm curious to see what he does this fall because he's really transforming his body.
Yeah, to be honest with you, like I turned on his film and I thought it's solid Power 5 prospect. Like I was thinking, is he a Sed McConnell kind of type? But now that he's up, I think Joey, the high school coach, told you 295, 290. Illinois doesn't want him to throw on too much more weight. But I'm very intrigued by that because he is moving inside from that edge position last year as a junior to probably a 3 technique type of role for Illinois. And I know Alan True is a huge fan of what he's seen on film and what he's heard about the kid, that he moved him up from 24th in the state to 10th in the state in the rankings. So right now he is the highest rated according to 24/7 Sports in this class. So that's a big win over Kansas and Kansas State. And I just think the kind of guy that Illinois has to get in state.
Yeah, and they did. I mean, we kind of talked about him, Jeremy, for a while as one of those. This phrase has now been a little bit overused, but one of those litmus test guys. Just in the fact that this wasn't a 5-month process to get him. This has been years and years. Same with Braden Trim. Like you've really stacked time on top of this, and you want to see a payout on that time investment that you put into recruiting these kids. So to get him, that was just a win that shows Illinois can win those types of recruitments. Obviously, you've got to elevate, right? You want to be kind of more in that top 10. We talked about that. We don't need to continue to rehash that, but that was a good one for them to say, hey, we can get the guys we're supposed to get here. And obviously, it was a good evaluation because, as you mentioned, Alan is really, really high on him. I would say I'm kind of torn. I don't want to take the defensive line theme here, but I want to say Cedric Weich because I think he's going to have an opportunity. Like the numbers last year at Cardinal Gibbons weren't spectacular, right? Like when you think of, just in your mind, you think of any Division I prospect with counting stats, you would think a little bit more than that. And now he goes over to St. Thomas Aquinas, and as Ryan has mentioned to us, he's going to have a chance to play against really good competition and a chance to really show himself. And he's got the speed. I like the comps that you two have thrown out there, and I'll let you get into that. I'm not going to take credit for those, but I'm really interested to see what his senior year looks like because I think he could be a guy that maybe catches some eyes a little bit more.
Ryan, you were a fan of his highlight film. So what stands out to you about Cedric Weich, 3-star running back out of Florida, that I think one of his best attributes, especially early in his career, could be his kick return ability?
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I saw his tape, he just looked like he could do it all. He's very well-rounded. He can run out of the backfield. He can catch out of the backfield. He's got some great clips on his film where he's running wheel routes and looking the ball in like he's done it before. And it's not easy for all running backs to catch like a receiver. So the fact he can do that's really valuable. He's got great vision in the open field. We talked about this a little bit. The one question is really how he's going to do in between the tackles against some bigger bodies. But, he's pretty well put together. He's compact. He's got a little bit of that like Jason Ford before Jason Ford turned into a semi-truck. But he's a well-built guy. He's got good agility, keeps his feet moving, bounces off the first tackler more often than not. So I think he's a guy that could find himself in a lot of different situations just because he is so versatile, and that'll help him find his way onto the field sooner just because he can do so many different things and carve his niche early on with so many other talented players ahead of him.
I think he's a great change of pace back. You got your bell cow, you hope, and Caden Fagan. We'll see if Jordan Anderson or Josh McCray have that. I think Khalil Valentine, just a long speed, I feel a little bit better about him with, and I feel like he can add more. He's just a bigger, longer kid. I feel like he can add more. But Valentine and Weich both add just that complementary to the bigger backs. Like it gives you some speed, gives you some guy that you can get on stretch runs. And you mentioned, Ryan, he's just as comfortable as a receiver than as a runner. And I'm really interested to see if Aiden Lawfrey can add that this year. But if Weich can kind of play that role in the long term, like he's a talented back, chose Illinois over Boston College. I see some Reggie Corbin in space. Reggie didn't have the greatest long speed except for 2018 when he was running away from everybody. That kind of came back in 2019, didn't have as many of those. But I saw a really solid addition to what is already a strong backfield. One of my favorite gets here is flipping Robert Jones III. They needed a corner. They needed more length. They needed some physicality out there, and to flip him when, CJ Bass out of East St. Louis, sounds like Missouri, might be the lead there, and he might be more of a safety. I see RJ Jones as a no doubt corner. I think he could play nickel. I think he could play safety, but just he kind of reminds me of Zach Toby. And we didn't get to see the end of Zach Toby, but like we saw that he was good enough, talented enough skilled enough to play as a freshman. Ups and downs, of course, but I just think RJ Jones, a no doubt Power 5 corner, and adds to a room that, like, I thought Vernon Woodward was a great addition. Terrence Brooks, obviously a huge addition for Illinois, but Ryan, I'm a fan of him because it's hard to get those premium positions and to flip him from a good program. I know it's ACC, but Dave Doran's a heck of a coach, heck of a defensive coach, and I thought that was a nice win.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the name Vernon Woodward, and he's kind of the Vernon Woodward of this class, right? And getting a guy that plays confidently, I think that's one thing that can really affect a cornerback's play is lack of confidence. You know, when they get in their own head, sometimes they tend to get a little bit off schedule, or maybe they overthink things. But getting a guy that can just play with the flow of the game, plays confidently, totally understands who he is and what he does, but has his length, has his physical abilities. And you mentioned NC State's had some really good defenses over the years. I mean, they play in the ACC, which in the last few years has been more prolific scoring, but Dave Doran's a defensive guy. And he was a defensive guy, a defensive coach under Bret Bielema at Wisconsin. And so you got to imagine those guys are looking for very similar players, hence why you've seen some of these battles over the last couple of years. But I really like the pickup as well. Corner was one of the positions when you're talking about depth in the long run that you really need. And they've got a lot of pieces. And, I don't want to jump too far ahead, but truth is that they've got a lot of great depth and a lot of great prospects at so many positions on this roster now. And it's just a matter of, can they convert that to production? Mm-hmm. And so, it's true on a lot of defensive spots. It's true with receivers, but, Jones is a guy who you can easily see that once maybe some of these more experienced transfer corners like Terrence Brooks moves on, there's going to be spots for guys like Vernon Woodward. There'll be spots for guys like RJ Jones to step in and play. And so I think he's got to come in with the mindset of, I'm going to compete now. If I get a spot, great. Because, you've got a lot of guys moving on. Tyler Strain's getting close to the end of his Illini career. There's spots to be had. And so if he comes in there with confidence and plays the way he knows he can play, I think it's very realistic that he could see the field early, especially with his main defensive backs as they regularly throw out there.
All right, Joey, speaking of flips, let's bring up Eric Gale. Illinois flips from Cincinnati. Huge position of need. I just saw ESPN now has Eric Gale is a 4-star prospect at an 80 rating for them, but a big get because they need this position. And Eric Gale obviously has talent. If you turn on the film, long, athletic, kind of reminds me a little of Calvin Smith, but this was a position they had to get. So to get one of the guys that they got, Tyrone Burris goes to Louisville, LaJesse Harold goes to, Florida, LSU, and then Donovan Darden is probably South Carolina or NC State. So to get one of these was big, and to flip them, I know from a Big 12 program, but to get that kid was, I thought, filling a huge need. You're muted, Joe.
Man, I thought I got out of. I know. He's a guy. There's a lot of upside there. Like, you see physically, there's a lot to like, and I'm with you. That I still think that's, and we'll get into this. I still think that's your biggest position of need. If you can add another guy late here in the cycle, if you can find someone that you like, but they had to get one. There was a lot of good prospects. Like, they were in on good edge rushers in this class, and they didn't close on LaJesse Harold. I think there was the expectation really that they would. And then you mentioned Tyrone Burris. We kind of thought he was Indiana bound until a late move there to Louisville. So you had to get one of those guys. And Gale was a guy who wasn't in that initial crop. I don't think that we had kind of considered when the calendar turned to June. Donovan Darden obviously is still on the board, but as you mentioned, maybe going elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, you've got to restock that position room, because frankly, a year ago at this time, it was one that you probably felt as good as you did long-term, short-term, in any position on the field. And then Calvin Smith transfers. Who am I missing here? There was one more.
Jared Beatty.
Yeah.
Josiah Knight.
Josiah Knight, that was the one.
Yeah.
And part of it, Joey, is, I mean, I can understand why some of these, why Calvin Smith might transfer. This would have been his third position coach. Like, there's been a ton of turnover at this position with coaches. So it's kind of amazing they haven't had more, but not getting Josiah Knight in, I thought, was a big loss through admissions. And Calvin Smith, they thought was going to play this year because he's talented.
Especially after Ezekiel Holmes moved to defensive line, that really opened up. Sorry to cut you off, Jeremy. That really opened up his spot there. But yeah, I mean, I would still like to see them if they can get their hands on one more, and maybe that's a late eval, maybe that's a late flip. And we'll get into that too here later on in terms of how many more. But we've seen this staff push this into August or into October, into November, and trying to push and flip some of these guys. Now, that's kind of a two-way street. You've got to show that you are winning football games, and you maybe need a little help that the other team isn't winning as many games. But yeah, it was a good get at a position of huge need. It was number one on your list for a long time. I don't know if it still is. We can get into that in a second, but getting him and develop, right? And long-term, he's a guy who won't need to come in and contribute right away. Ideally, they would still have some options there, but just an intriguing athlete.
All right, Ryan, I want to throw the last two guys at you because I feel like these are two of the higher floor guys in the class. Desmond Stroughton, just big physicals, measured it almost at 6'2", 192 at his camp at Illinois. Not the fastest dude if you're doing a 40 time, but I just think he's a really high IQ player, physical as heck, and that I think a strong safety role. And then Isaiah White, just a nose tackle prospect. I think he's a no doubt Big Ten nose tackle, strong as heck. Kind of a position that we don't focus on a lot, but has been very important to this defense, and they've been very good at developing it. So what do you got on Stroughton and White?
Well, Stroughton already looks like a college player. I mean, the guy's just built, and that's all a relationship based on Corey Parker. You know, he had that relationship with Detroit area prospect, but the guy's just like blue collar, tough. I mean, if you haven't seen his film, go watch it, because there's a couple times when he's playing running back and he just runs over a defender. And like, that's just how he plays. He just plays physical, tough. Like, you're not going to stop me. I'm going to stop you. I'll be damned if I end up on my back. No way. And so like, he plays tough. He's probably more of an in the box type safety. The guy I compared him to was probably Kevin Mitchell from back in like the mid 2000s. You know, he and Justin Harrison had that great safety duo on that Rose Bowl team. And he just feels like he's that guy that comes from maybe the middle of the field and can take your head off. Maybe at least legally now, thanks targeting. But he can at least, you know, deliver those big hits and either stop the ball carrier or sometimes dislodge the ball. But I mean, he's basically built like a linebacker playing safety. And he has good speed. He still has pretty good speed for the position.
I think he's going to be a special team extraordinaire too. Like early in his career, I think he can make an impact. Joey, I thought Isaiah White was a great win early on. And it felt like Terrence Jamison was one more away from having a great month, but I still thought it was a really good month for him getting Cameron Brooks. And then Isaiah White had offers. He was going to take an official to Washington. Boston College was in the mix. Like, he had a lot of Power 4 options there. And so for Illinois to get him early, I thought was a good one.
Strike two.
The mute.
I never mute, but we had some audio, and I'm like, I'm just going to keep muted, and I never think about it. Yeah, I'm with you. I think I know his coach thinks he's on the brink of a really, really big season. He's a big-bodied guy. He moves pretty well. True nose, like a very, very true nose tackle, and that's fine. Terrence Jamison, again, if you're a nose tackle, probably want to link up with that guy because he's helped develop them, you know, really, really well. I like the get, and we'll see if, you know, how that senior year plays out. But he's been a very productive high school player to this point anyway. So it's not like you need some big jump to really solidify the commitment. It's a good win, a good Power 5 defensive line recruiting win that after some misses early in this coaching staff's tenure, you're seeing them start to stack a few more of those. And that's really, really key because we saw them go to the portal heavy this offseason to make up for some lost classes, some of which they weren't responsible for. But now you want to start to build that pipeline of guys, and slowly but surely that's coming along. They've got some good prospects in that room. And I think Isaiah White is another one. But as you mentioned, pretty good month for Terrence Jamison. Pretty good month, and one away. Derek Simmons, who ultimately went to Michigan State, who I thought Illinois was right there in the mix with, even down late into the month of June. That would have been a cherry on top of a heck of a good month, but it was still a really good time to be him.
You feel that, guys? Warmer, sunnier days are calling. And fuel up for them with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals in time for summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart and Keto, or my favorite, Protein Plus. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. Make today the day you kickstart a new healthy routine with Factor. What are you waiting for? With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore, so you can crush your wellness goals this May with dietitian-approved meals and ingredients that you can trust. So treat yourself to restaurant-quality meals that feature premium ingredients like filet mignon, shrimp, and blackened salmon. And the best part, you keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready in 2 minutes. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up. So enjoy effortless support for your lifestyle. Choose from 6 menu preferences to help you manage calories, maximize protein intake, avoid meat, or simply eat well balanced. So head to factormeals.com/Illini50 and use code Illini50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% of your next month. That's code Illini50 at factormeals.com/Illini50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. All right, well, let's talk a little bit about that. We will get into our overall thoughts so far of this class, because I know people want us to get into that. We will, but let's go with toughest miss, because they didn't get everybody, obviously, that they wanted during this month. Does anyone feel like, Joey, Ryan, raise your hand if you feel like you want to take this one first? Who wants to
I'll do it.
Go for it, Joe.
This is unbelievable. What a nightmare. I'm going to say the toughest miss is the guy I think that they had in Davion Chandler. I loved him as a prospect. Illinois loved him as a prospect. My understanding, he and Justin Stepp connected very, very well on that trip. He's a speed guy, still big. He's not necessarily like a short speed guy that we've seen come through, and there's nothing wrong with that, but he kind of played in both worlds there with some size and speed. You had him committed, and Indiana was very, very aggressive in their pursuit of him. They're the home state. That's a tough one, man, because I don't think they were looking necessarily for a second high school guy. Like, they weren't hell-bent, I guess is the best way to say, on getting another high school guy on top of Braden Trimble, but they loved him. They loved his tape, and to see him flip was a tough one. And maybe he's a guy you keep tabs on and see how that goes, but he's a good prospect. I don't want to shrug that off like it's nothing. He's got a lot of tools that are really, really impressive.
Yeah, earlier last month, we had the podcast. And I said, which 3-star should we not overlook? And Davion Chandler was that for me, Ryan, just because speed. He's 6 foot, so it's not like he's short. But it's just been a while since Illinois has truly had that guy who can take the top off of defense, and be a very skilled receiver. Like Justin Hardy had unbelievable speed, but just wasn't a very consistent wide receiver. He's gone on to have a heck of a NFL career as a defensive back and, most importantly, special teamer. But I just thought Davion Chandler had some of that, I hate to say, like AJ Jenkins ability that it just feels like it's been lacking in the Illini receiver room. Like, they got big physical guys. You bring in a guy like Sakari Franklin. I think Colin Dixon, who can be kind of versatile pieces, but just a definite, no doubt, speed demon like Davion Chandler, who gets acceleration, who has that separation. That was a tough flip, and Indiana's been very aggressive. They have raised NIL for Signetti, so kudos to them for the flip, but that one definitely hurt Illinois, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, you said it. There's not a lot of guys in the Midwest that have that sort of speed. Usually you're looking at like Florida, Georgia, Texas for guys that can take the top off the defense like that. And you said it. Some of those guys have speed, but they don't necessarily have the skill to go with it. He had a little bit of both. Probably not the most premier receiver out there, but still a really good prospect that is, potential future starter in the Big Ten. So that one hurts. For me, I go back a little further. I think you could point to guys like Nathaniel Marshall, like Nate Marshall and Illinois legacy, or you could point to a Chris Burgess, who was, Illinois was, I think, his second offer, second only to maybe Akron. And those are probably guys that are still going to continue to recruit through signing day, because why wouldn't you? But, for me, I look at more of the gettable type guys you were in the final picture for. And it's a guy like Burt Goucher or some of those, 10 to 15 ranked in-state guys that are just really good defensive players that fit Bielema's defensive style. A lot of people have been, what was that?
Carson Cooney. They offered
the same idea. Yeah. And it's just, a lot of people have been boo-boo on in-state recruiting, and it's tough. We said this since Bielema started. In-state recruiting is only going to improve as wins improve. Now, I think they've done a pretty good job of at least raising the floor from where it was. But until they're consistently winning games, making bowls, and playing, January 1st and on, it's going to be tough to get those top 5 to 10 guys in state. And it's just, they've done a great job of getting in the picture, staying in the picture. But at the same time, there's some guys in that 10 to 15 range that are slipping through their fingers to places like Iowa or Minnesota, Michigan State, some even to Michigan or Notre Dame. To me, those are the tough ones because they're just such sound players that fit so well in the style of ball that Bielema likes to play.
Joey, I think the other aspect we have to bring up here is, Nathaniel Marshall goes to Michigan. Who can blame the kid? Christopher Burgess goes to Notre Dame. Who can blame the kid? But I don't think Illinois, especially with those two, they were one of the first offers. They were the first Power 5 offer for Burgess. They were one of the first for Marshall, if not the first. And they got them on campus. And Illinois, I think, was in the top 2 or 3 for both those guys. But they choose those places. Plus, NIL has to be a factor when we're talking about last year's class. Some of the guys they were in on were getting big offers. Marquise Lightfoot goes to Miami and beat out Ohio State for him. And we know Miami is throwing a lot of big money around. Justin Scott was one of those in-state kids who goes to Miami as well. And if you're Illinois, listen, I want those top 5 in-state kids, but I'd probably rather invest in a Terrence Brooks or a Zachary Franklin, to be honest with you, if I have a limited amount of resources, unlike in Ohio State or Michigan or some of these other schools. So that's another factor, but winning is really important. It still matters a ton, and Illinois needs to win more games for those guys. But I thought the process was sound. They just have to have more success, and to be honest with you, they probably need more NIL if you're going to throw a bunch of money at high school kids for an Illinois program that needs more for sure things, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I'll be curious how that changes when this House settlement starts to land in place and some of the ripple effects of that come through. But I've said it before, I feel like the in-state process, is it netting the top-tier wins that everyone wants to see at this point? Not yet. They've netted good wins. Don't get me wrong. With the guys that we've mentioned, those are top-tier guys, and they're picking the programs that they're picking. But the process is there. You're getting in early on their sophomore years. You look at guys we've mentioned, Levette, Brooks, Trimble, Fagan, go down the list. It's been a multi-year thing. Elsie, they've done a good job process-wise. But as you mentioned, NIL wins, those, that's the next step. That's the next step in getting closer, or really, I shouldn't even say getting closer, to getting those guys to sign, to getting those guys to commit. If you want to talk about one top 15 guy that I can't quite shake at this point, and some of it's the process. We talked about edge as many times as we have. Gabe Kaminsky's a guy that I thought really all the coaching turnover of that position is probably the one that it hurt the most there with him, because it felt like there were times where it's hey, they're doing okay. Charlie Bullen's doing okay building this, and then
if Charlie Bullen was still here, I think Gabe Kaminsky might be in a line. Now Stanford, he's going there mostly for academics, right? I know Illinois. That's a guy I think Illinois will take till signing day, Joey. So it'd be interesting to see if they can get somebody like that. But the edge position has been difficult because of the turnover that we're talking about. The third assistant coach there, Kevin Kane leaves for a defense coordinator job at Purdue, but he was recruiting the Chicagoland area really well, especially in the suburbs. I thought Charlie Bullen was doing a fantastic job to get in like he did with Marquise Lightfoot early on, getting in on a guy like Gabe Kaminsky that put, I thought, Illinois in a good position. But then you have more coaching turnover. And I thought that really hurt, especially at that position, but also in the Chicago suburbs, where Charlie Bullen was one of the lead recruiters in the southwest suburbs.
Yeah, I'm with you there. And that's the one, I guess, looking back, I got a little too June focused, and I still think Chandler's a big miss. So I'm glad Ryan zoomed out and kind of reminded me there was more to this recruiting class than just the month of June. But man, he's the one that you would circle. And he's a guy that I would watch until signing day, because I think they're going to keep pushing. And if Seth Coleman and if Gabe Akis have really, really good starts to the season, I would imagine that tape is going to find its way to Gabe Kaminsky's desk, because it should. And, we'll see. And I think Clint Sentum's a personable guy. He's obviously been there. He's done that. He recruited well at Virginia. We saw that too. Let's see if they still have a little bit more up their sleeve. I don't know. I'm not reporting, we don't know what their level of conversation is, but we know they like the kid. And we know that, they have high expectations for their outside linebacker group, which could play.
The other one I would mention, you mentioned him before, but Derek Simmons. I thought if you could have landed him on top of what you've added on the defensive line, that would have been big. Illinois was the first Big Ten offer, and then Michigan State decided to get in the in-state school, kind of overlooked him for a while. And I think that pull was just too much for him. But Illinois, Terrence Jameson did a great job recruiting him. So you had the opportunity with the official visit, but just not quite enough. And he was just, Ryan, one of my personally favorite defensive line prospects they had in this class. There's just, I know he plays at a lower level in Michigan, but his size, his athleticism, his burst, like his tenacity, I thought he had a really high ceiling. So that would have been an exclamation point for me in that defensive line class.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason they wanted him so bad, right? Like defensive linemen, I almost said this earlier, but great opportunity now. Defensive linemen, especially like Power 5 defensive linemen, Power 4, whatever you want to call them nowadays, they don't grow on trees. Like to find guys that can actually play at a Big Ten, an ACC, a Big 12, or an SEC level, especially, I mean, SEC is a kind of a different tier when you're talking about some of these 6'5", 325-pound linemen that break 5.0 40s. It's just hard to find those guys, and that's why it's such a competitive position to recruit. And so, I think they did fairly well with the guys they got. But, if you're able to add another one like a Simmons, or when you do miss out on a guy like a Simmons, it stings because defensive line is such a tough position to recruit and a tough position to recruit successfully.
Can I add?
Yeah.
Prep, Power 5, Power 4 ready, prep, not ready, but, like caliber defensive lineman in high school is transfer portal left tackle recruiting. Right? We've said this 1,000 times. There's a huge, huge, huge demand, and there's just not enough supply to be like of no doubt Power 4 guys. Now, there's guys that you think you like, and I think Illinois has done a good job of like finding your Alex Brays of the world that you think is being overlooked and can be a Power 4 guy, but there's way too big of a demand for the supply. So, as Ryan mentioned, when you miss out on a guy that you have on campus that you love, that looks like he can be that guy and come in and be an impact player for you at some point in his career, it stings. Is it the end of the world? No, because Isaiah White and Cameron Brooks. But yeah, you would have really liked that kid.
At the same time, Alex Bray and Jeremiah Warren are going to contribute, as the second-year guys. Angel McCollum, Demetrius John, Eddie Turk, Pat Farrell, like they've recruited some good prospects, and now you had Cameron Brooks and Isaiah White. So we had huge questions about their defensive line recruiting. Now they're stacking these Power 4 wins, which is a good sign for their future. We mentioned it, outside linebacker, probably the top need remaining because they only have 2 underclassmen set to be on next year's roster, Mason Moragan and Joe Barna, who's really impressed early on in his Illini tenure. But they add Eric Gale. They'd like to get another one. That'll be interesting to see what they can do moving forward. Ryan, what would you add next? Like what other position do you think that they need to address long-term in the class of 2025?
Well, I think you guys already kind of hit on it with Davion Chandler's flip to Indiana. I still think there's a spot for a receiver in there. I mean, they've got a pretty deep room, but if you can still go out there and find a guy that has some of those same traits in terms of being, a deep threat receiver, that's probably one spot that I think I'd fill, because really right now they don't have another receiver in this class. And so to get a guy that can go be that deep threat in this class, I think is an important spot to fill. You could probably make an argument that in the long run that Jershaun Newton may be one of your linebacker commits, whether he plays inside or outside. I think he has the ability to kind of float around, and he's got the quickness and agility to run a lot of those kind of stunts and sweeps and things like that to the outside and get around the edge. But, I still think maybe you keep your eyes peeled for a linebacker. Just looking at what that room looks like, the inside linebacker group is probably in the next couple of years going to matriculate out some guys like I am blanking right now.
Kaneno Odeluga.
You're gonna lose some of those upperclassmen like Rosiek, Odeluga. You still got Easton Baker coming in. Malachi Hood's dealt with a lot of injuries. James Kreutz is probably going to be your anchor at that position for the time being, but I think they could stand to add some depth there. So if you can find a good linebacker prospect, maybe on top of Jershaun Newton, whether that's through prep recruiting or the transfer portal, and that's probably one other thing that is tough to balance now, because the transfer portal is such a big market at the end of the season. But I think that's when you have a better idea of what you truly need and have a chance to do a reset before you go into the offseason.
Yeah, I would add, Joey, kind of to that point, like that has to play a role here. Like they don't have to reach for developmental prospects anymore. Like you should just find a late left tackle body that you feel like maybe you could develop. You don't have to do that anymore, because you can just wait for the transfer portal, get an immediate impact guy who's going to make a higher impact. And then you have that scholarship again the next year, the 2 years later. Tight end and inside linebacker, kind of two positions that they haven't addressed yet in this class. Tight end, man, they have looked, they have scouted, and they really haven't pushed for any big prospects there. Didn't get any official visits. Well, I think they're going to push this scholarship to 2026 because you got J.C. Anderson, Max Suter. I think is probably a long shot. J.C. Anderson's going to be tough out of Mount Zion, but I think he's probably their number one guy on the entire board in the class of 2026. And I think they will prioritize him like that. And then they offer Gavin Miller out of Wheaton St. Francis, who hasn't played a varsity game, but is a ridiculous athlete. So anything to add to that, Joey? Because it feels like, tight end, they lose one guy in Carson Goda, but Cole Russ could be back. Tanner Arkin, Henry Boyer, Tanner Hollinger, Nate Ginn can all be back next year. Not a huge position to need. I just think they're going to shoot for top talent. I don't think they're going to try and reach here.
Yeah, and that's a position we've seen them, frankly, reach on later in cycles because it's, as Barry Lundy mentioned, I thought on the podcast we had on signing day, you don't get one with everything, right? Those are rare. Guys who can block, who can go catch, those are rare top 50 prospects. So you got to develop that other part into them. So I like the fact that I don't think they're going to reach. I'd rather see them kick this thing into the 2026 class, go all out for a J.C. Anderson, who they love, who's going to be in the mix for a top 5 guy in the state of Illinois by the time it's all said and done. See if you can go fish him and keep him local. And I'm with you. Tanner Hollinger is a guy who's got a lot of, you look long-term, you don't need to freak out right now because you don't have that particular position. With Hollinger is a guy you like. I think Jake Furtney, the walk-on, is a guy who can go ahead. You're shaking your head. You agree, don't you?
He's one of my favorite walk-ons they've added. I think he's a scholarship guy. And they got him as a walk-on. We rated him at 24/7 Sports as an 86 rating, which is a scholarship guy. I would be almost shocked if he's not on scholarship next year. So that's another reason I don't think you have to reach, is because I think you got a steal in Jake Furtney. Last year, he's probably more ready to play than Hollinger, but just Hollinger's longer, bigger upside long term. But I think that was a really good tight end class, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm with you. So, in terms of just, okay, they don't have this position or tight end or linebacker. Not that caught up because there's a lot more nuance there. I do think finding another no doubt corner would be something that's interesting to me. Right now, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, I think RJ Jones is the one that you would say no doubt corner, but then you look, it's Levette could play safety, right? Those guys who could, Zanny Scott, Zane is probably a nickel, I would say at this point, but no doubt outside guys. Maybe I'm just a little too caught up in what we watched last year where it's oh my God, they don't have enough. That now in my brain is you can't have enough. But I would just be curious if they'd be interested to add one more.
Well, because we're talking about when Terrence Brooks is gone, Xavier Scott's gone, Strain, Cox are gone. It's going to be Jaheim Clark, Vernon Woodward, Amar Reynolds, RJ Jones. That's good talent. They don't lose any seniors out of the defensive backfield. They don't have any seniors in the defensive backfield, but they have 4 committed, which I find really interesting. There's probably going to be some attrition in that room. But here's the other thing, guys. The rosters are going to expand, or the scholarship limit is going to expand based on whatever the roster limit will be. And Illinois is going to max out their football scholarship limit. So if the NCAA says, hey, we're going to have 100 guys, they could add more talent here in the class of 2025. But again, I think it might be more transfer heavy in that. I'd be interested. You probably add a more developmental guys like Clayton Lacados out of Edwardsville might be a guy they look at to add some more depth, because those guys who are kind of the borderline walk-ons, could they earn a scholarship? Those guys are going to be in scholarship moving forward. So I do think there's going to be a smaller class. I think it's, if they didn't expand the roster limit or the scholarship limit, I think Illinois would probably just add 1 or 2 more in this class, kind of late sleepers as they usually do. Tanner Heckel is a guy they're really excited about. That was a late sleeper in this past class. Obviously, Matt Krasetich and Matthew Bailey in the previous classes. Maybe Okados is that guy now, but I still think they'd probably go more transfer heavy to fill out those spots moving forward. So, Joey, that's going to be fascinating to watch, especially if the scholarship or the roster limit goes to 120. And are you going to fill all those scholarships? If you want to compete in the Big Ten, probably. And it'd be interesting to see how the dynamic of everything in that, how does Ohio State get all these kids and you're just hoping for the rebound? It's going to be fascinating to watch.
Yeah, it's going to be really interested. And you're right. Programs are going to fill their scholarships. I would love to be a fly on the wall in the office where the AD says, hey, you can have 120, scholarships for football, but listen, we're going to go with 90. One, you're going to be missing scholarships and probably a football coach, right? Like you've got to, if you want to be competitive, you've got to max out the financial, the full 22 million. You've got to max out the scholarships because football's the engine, as we've talked about a lot, to make things go. So you're going to put your resources in there to make sure that's hitting. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. And you know, I know the idea of like a taxi squad has been kind of thrown around a little bit. Is that more of like a walk-on area? I don't know. I mean, there's still so many questions about how this looks, and 120 feels like it might be high. Going from 85 to 120 feels like a huge jump, but 85 to 100 feels like it can be well within the realm of possibilities. So yeah, man, it must be hard. That's kind of like the underlying thing with the class of 2025 is, and let's be honest, Illinois benefited from other programs being full, right? And some points I don't know that you can sit here and hold off. Obviously, programs are filling up in the way that they know, but it's not as cut and dry as it used to because you don't know how many numbers you have when that time comes.
It's just amazing, Ryan. Like I was told by somebody, we don't know how many scholarships we need to fill. Like the fact that was the case in this summer is insane.
Yeah, and Joey, I don't want to skip over this because I think you bring up a good point. I just want to expand on it. You know, look at all the programs right now that are having a hard time keeping all 85 guys happy. Like, you think that's going to get any easier when it goes to 100 or 110 or 120? The transfer portal is going to be just like, it's going to completely explode. It's already nuts. And if you imagine that you've got now a third of your, like over half or maybe even 2/3 of your roster that's not seeing playing time they want, you're going to see massive, massive attrition through the transfer portal. You know, and the flip side of course, being that you have more chances to hit on guys. But at the same time, like if you're not keeping guys playing or they're just sitting the bench and they're not happy doing that, you're going to see massive roster turnover every single year.
Well, in the way
but you're going to go to a program with another 100 scholars, right? So like it's kind of, is that talent going to matriculate around? I don't know.
Here's what I'm thinking. Like if you're a MAC school, do you even bother with high school recruiting? Because those MAC guys now might be the 85th through 100th scholarships at these Big Ten schools, right? So maybe some of the guys that go to Illinois go to Ohio State instead, but then they're just matriculating back and forth between each other. So I would just kind of prioritize the transfer portal to get the guys that are just like, I need to play. I'm a sophomore, junior, third, fourth year. I need to play. So you get the better talent. I agree with you, Ryan. I think it's going to cause even more, more transfers than we already have, which is insane.
Yeah, I think it's just going to magnify things because you're already getting some of that trickle down from guys that go to programs, you know, some of the blue bloods or otherwise that aren't getting the playing time they were promised during the recruitments. And, you know, whether they're ending up at, you know, different P4 schools where there's an opportunity or they're ending up at, a MAC school or a group of 5 program, it's already happening. And I think if you talk about higher volume, it's just going to magnify it even more because at the end of the day, it's all really a game of musical chairs. Only 11 guys start on offense, 11 guys start on defense on any given team. And there's only so many spots to play and trying to, there's just more upheaval, more turnover, and it's just going to take longer for the dust to settle over off season. And God bless the player personnel departments that have to handle all this because as stressful as it is now, I think it's only going to put more demand on them, and they're going to need more people to manage this and keep tabs on everybody that's moving around every offseason.
And that's why I think 120 is like, that's why I think anything over 100 feels like coaches are going to say, hold on. Like, yeah, we'd love to get 100 scholarship guys who are really, really talented. But some of these coaches are going to say, what about in 2 years? Like, that's why it's hard for me to think this number gets absurd, right? Like, is it 90 to 100 feels like the landing spot? Otherwise, I think these coaches are going to say, we're exactly what Ryan is saying. This is going to be chaos in 2 years. Or maybe they'll say, hell, we don't care. We can take all the 5 stars and it doesn't matter. And we're going to win a ton of games. I don't know.
Well, for the Blue Bloods, it's also going to be a really expensive game of keep away. If the intent is to try and poach as many of the top prospects as you can, you know, if you're paying those guys some sort of NIL or otherwise, or on a revenue distribution, it's going to get expensive to pay that many talented players who are just sitting there basically as dead capital.
I wonder how we're going to be talking about this in 2 years. Right? Like, I'm just like revenue distribution. Yeah, a year. Like, how are we talking about this? How are you talking about like how you split up potentially $11 million, right? For a football team, or $10 million, $9 million, whatever it is, whatever you want to give your baseball or basketball teams. But for a lot of these schools, it's going to be fascinating to see how this all works and just how you actually manage your roster. All right, before we get out of here, open up the floor. What do you think of this recruiting haul? Just overall thoughts, what this class is, because right now Illinois has the number 53 ranked class in the country. Lower quantity is going to play a role in that. They are 12th in the Big Ten in average star rating, 16th overall in the team rankings. So go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, B. You want to do a grading scale? Like, can we do that? I would say like I don't want to go B minus. I do like the wins that they've had. Like I'm landing on a B just because there was more out there, and it felt like they were kind of, if you want to go into football terms, in the red zone on some of those guys that really could have taken this up to that B plus range. I just don't want to diminish some of the wins they've got, because they've got good wins. And I think, Jeremy, as I pull this up, they have maybe there's 2 guys who didn't report Power 5 offers, but everyone's
got at least one. I mean, Zanai Scott had one. Griffin Rousseau had 2. Now the coaching changes happened at each of those other schools, but every other guy has Power 5 offer.
Okay, we haven't said that a lot at Illinois, right? We just haven't. So like that's why I'm looking at this. Like, how can you drop this to a C plus or really a B minus if that's the grading scale we want to go? Because they're winning Power 5 battles across the board with these guys. I just think there's still a little bit of that. Hey, what if they could have closed on Derek Simmons, or what if they could have closed on, Gabe Kaminsky, or some of the guys kept Davion Chandler? Then you're looking at this like, man, they've really got, like, they're stacking this. There's top 1,000 guys across the board. Like, this looks like a class with some top end, with some depth. Like they kind of touched all their bases here.
Or if you had like a headliner like Chris Burgess, something
That's
like
right,
that.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Ryan. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a solid class. And as Joey touched on, there's a few guys that they didn't end up landing that would have been home runs, but you're hitting a lot of good players. And I was going to mention this earlier, but now it seems like a great time for it, is if you need an indication of how recruiting is trending at Illinois, look at the offer lists of the guys that they're landing now. You look at, Braden Trimble, who had some great offers late. He picked up an Auburn offer late. You look at Cedric Weiss, who had like Florida State, a bunch of SEC schools. Jershaun Newton had Florida State, Miami. Like, they're landing players against these programs that have not only great NIL, but also just great heritage. You're stealing a guy like an Eric Gale, who's a borderline 4-star player, from his hometown program that's now a P4 school. And so they're doing really well.
Just because I know people are listening and say, well, those schools weren't pushing for some of those guys, but still, like, that shows that those schools thought this guy could be a part of our program at one point, right? Like they thought enough of him to offer him at one point.
Yeah, and it's not like they just have one random offer from one other P4 school. Some of these guys have several, which tells you that at least at some point this guy was a pretty solid prospect. So to me, if you look at, again, just to revisit, if you look at the quality of offers that some of these players had before making their commitment to Illinois, that to me is one of the better indicators that they're raising the floor. Now, in order to really hit that next level, they are going to need to start winning some more of these challenging battles, but it's been progress, and they've made progress year over year. It's just, I think in order to accelerate that progress, they will need to start winning some of those tougher battles for more high profile prospects.
Yeah. Listen, these are kind of arbitrary points, but it kind of gives you an idea. Top 1,000 composite recruits. They've had 9 in this class. That's tied for second most of the last decade for Illinois. I think this is you said the word solid. This is a really depth class. I think they're filling needs with no doubt Power 5 prospects. They're beating other Power 4 programs. I keep going back and forth between 5 and 4, but Power 4 teams for these guys. And just, they are continually elevating, I think, the floor of this program to be a consistently competitive Big Ten program. Under Bret Bielema, they're averaging 8 top 1,000 recruits per recruiting class. Under Lovie Smith, it was 6. And during his last 2 years, he had 6 total, right? So, like, Bret Bielema did not inherit, even though he had some really good players that ended up being great, the depth was bad. And there just wasn't enough solid to good players who can contribute at the Big Ten level. I think Bret Bielema is consistently raising the floor year after year, stacking these classes of no doubt Power 4 prospects. But whether he can raise and elevate that ceiling remains to be seen, because there's not a 4-star prospect. Illinois is one of 4 schools without a 4-star prospect. Now, those don't always work out, but in a league that is landing a ton of them, in a league that is getting deeper and tougher, you have to keep elevating your talent. And right now, they have 0 4-star prospect. Their highest ranked guy in the composite is 499. That would be the 3rd lowest year of a highest ranked prospect in the last 10 years. So I just think they still need to show, can they get to that level? But Joey, on the other hand, I'm very encouraged by their transfer recruiting, because they're starting to land some of the guys from there, like Terrence Brooks, Zachary Franklin, JC Davis. Those are potential elevating stars that they weren't getting in the portal before. So the fact that they're getting them now in the portal is a source of optimism for me.
Yeah, I agree with that. And let me ask you guys, both of you guys, this. I think this is a question that I'm really interested to see how it plays out over the course of the next 16, 24 months. This house settlement, does it impact Illinois in high school or transfer recruiting more? Because everyone's going to use it differently. And I think we've seen that they prefer this spring for sure, go get transfers who have college football playing experience, who can come in and play right away. I don't know that Illinois is going to be unique in that, but if I had to guess, I would say the approach is probably going to be that. But I see the floor to you two.
I would prioritize transfers because of where they're at in Bielema's build, because he has added guys who raise the floor of the program, and I think they can develop. But for me, I want to win now. Plus, I feel like if I have limited, well, they're not going to have as much limited with the house settlement. But if I'm prioritizing those things, for me, it's who can help me right now? Who's going to be the best return on investment? And I just feel like transfers, you know more about them. They've proven themselves at a higher level. I'm still like, that's where I want to invest my available funds in player accrual.
Yeah, to me, it follows a similar philosophy that Bielema currently has with NIL, right? You know, he doesn't necessarily want to have to go out into a bidding war for a prep prospect, as opposed to using it kind of as a reward for players who have contributed to the program. And I think, you know, now you've seen with some of the transfers they've offered and were able to bring in this offseason, that they were able to use NIL as a tool to get some strategic transfers into the program. And so I don't see them necessarily trying to build up some crazy war chest or using it as a war chest for prep prospects. I think they have found a bit of a niche, what works for the program right now, in terms of going after proven players who can contribute to the program immediately. Because Jeremy, you said it, return on investment is important. They don't have the luxury of bringing a guy in and having him be, you know, a well compensated, we'll say, prospect and not contributing for a year. They need guys that can come in and make an impact pretty quickly. And so that return on investment is important when you don't have nearly the same arsenal that some of the other programs have.
Now, Joey, if you're talking to me in 2028, Illinois is coming off 3 straight bowl games and they're in a great place, and there's a 2028 in-state quarterback, yeah, then you might change. But like where they're at right now, I just feel like it's got to be on the present to really stabilize your future.
Yeah, I think there are 2 variables sitting here. One, and some of this depends on what NIL looks like with this house settlement in full effect, but with all money being equal across the board in probably a perfect world and a hypothetical world.
Use that in air quotes, like equal, because I still feel like the revenue sharing won't make everything equal. It will help Illinois, though. I do think that's going to be the case.
It will. So the point being, though, if you have more margin for error in terms of how you're distributing money, like maybe you would try to go get that guy that beforehand, like we just don't, if we invest X amount of dollars into X high school recruit and he doesn't pan out, that hurts us because that was X% of our budget. Whereas if you've got more money to work with, maybe that changes their approach. And then hold on real quick. Like my other variable to this is let's put another hypothetical perfect world out there. They believe in their development. That's what they want to do, is develop players. So if in 3 years, these guys that we're talking about, like maybe they're like this is all coming together and they're developing these positions at a rate where they don't have, holy crap, we need to transfer left tackle now, or holy crap, we need a number 1 corner now. you have a more consistent development process, and there isn't this gap between empty recruiting classes or bad recruiting classes and lack of like if that all kind of gradually comes around at the same rate, then you have less spring freakouts where it's like we don't have a corner, we don't have left tackle would have been a winter freakout. So like, does that change it where it's like, okay, we don't have to go get a no doubt starter right now. There's always going to be misses. So like you can't make that a 100% thing. And we can go maybe invest in a high school kid that we think is going to be a mega star down the road for us.
Can I use our favorite phrase? A litmus test of this might be JC Anderson, right? Like this is going to be revenue sharing, and NIL Illinois has increased here recently. We'll see how all that works together, but he might be more valuable to Illinois than landing a transfer because of where he is, what he can be, the position.
Who's after him?
Yeah, and who's after him. So like, I think he's a guy that you might set aside a lot of what your NIL or revenue sharing for a high school player would be. I do think Bret Bielema would like his players to have to earn that revenue sharing dollars, but he might be a guy that is the number one spot in whatever your prep pool would be. And I think that he could be more valuable to Illinois than say a Notre Dame. We can just go find another guy, right? Like Illinois, because he's in your backyard and the position he plays and the need at that long term, that could be a fascinating one to watch.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like, again, he's going to end up being a top 247 guy, I think. I mean, you just watch how this is going. I don't think that's a hot take to say. And when you're a top 247 guy, you're probably a top 5 or 6 guy in the state of Illinois. Then that's a big recruitment for Illinois, given how early they were in on him, given his ties to his family's affinity for the basketball program and his location. Like, yeah, if there were going to be one, like the first one, the early one, he's a guy who you could see making some sense in that regard.
Yeah, 24/7 Sports has him at 103 overall, 6th tight end in the country, 3rd overall prospect in the state of Illinois. Ryan, anything else you want to add before we get out of here?
No, I think that was a good point. And you're looking ahead. You mentioned a quarterback down the line, and it'll be here before we know it. But 2027, a guy like Trey Taylor from Carmel up in Mundelein, that guy's, he's making his rounds, going to camps, but he's racking up offers. And when you're talking about the primo position in a program, on a guy that stands to have a very competitive market for him. He's pulling SEC offers, ACC offers.
Ohio State.
Yeah. And so, that'll be here before you know it. And recruiting is starting earlier and earlier. And so that's probably one of the first few, sans maybe like to the 2026 class, where you could see for a position that's in that much demand, maybe in 26, it's Jonas Williams. But 27, you're going to have another guy right behind him who's going to be just as coveted and going to have all the big programs coming after him. And, can you leverage some of those resources, or how much do you invest in that to keep a guy like that home and bring him into your program?
Joey, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
I got nothing. We had one more. I guess there's one more nugget that you would put, or one more topic that you would put out. And you asked how many more we think they could take in the class of 2025. It's tough, as we mentioned, because you don't know how many spots you have. I would say they're probably going into the season with flips in mind, maybe your late guys in mind, with probably 3 to 4 potential spots they could add. I don't know that you would get much higher than that unless things really, really opened up. But that's kind of the number I have in mind, and that might even be a touch high.
Yeah, and who they could target probably depends on the season they have, right? Like that's going to have a huge impact on who they could potentially flip, and depends on some of these other schools and who gets fired and who doesn't. That's what you're looking at, is when the coaches get fired, who do you have relationships with, and who can you bring into your program? Colin Dixon, I think, was a guy I'm really intrigued to see this season. Illinois is high on him. If he gets a little bit of a role in that wide receiver rotation, that was a big flip mid-season for them. Gabe Akis was a flip from Tulane, but you also won over Tennessee in that one. So ended up being a huge late addition. And we've seen Matthew Bailey was a huge late get, and they feel really good about Mac Rusetich and Tanner Heckel as well. So it'll be really interesting to watch. All right, I think we covered it all. A huge month for Illinois football recruiting, added some really good prospects. We'll see what else they can add, but training camp coming up soon. We'll have to start our preview series, positions previews as we go along, heading into training camp. But for Ryan Easterling and Joey Wagner, I'm Jeremy Werner. Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Illini Inquirer Podcast. Give us a follow, rating, review, wherever you get your podcast. And if you're watching us on YouTube, hello. Joey likes when I wave to the people. Hit that like button, subscribe to it, and hit the notifications bell. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time on the Illini Inquirer Podcast.